Picture this: the throne room at Knossos, 1450 BC, flames consuming centuries of accumulated wealth, bronze melting, stone cracking from impossible heat, clay tablets, records of an entire civilization's commerce, religion, governance, accidentally fired into permanence as the palace burns. Outside, the Mediterranean's most sophisticated Bronze Age culture collapses in a single catastrophic day. But who were these people? How did they build Europe's first advanced civilization on a small Mediterranean island? And why, after dominating the ancient world for over a millennium, did they vanish so completely that even their name was forgotten? The story begins not with destruction, but with transformation. Around 3000 BC, the island of Crete witnessed changes that would reshape Mediterranean history forever. Scattered Neolithic farming villages, simple communities growing wheat and barley, herding sheep and goats, suddenly began evolving into something unprecedented in European prehistory. The catalyst? Bronze. Around 2700 BC, Cretan craftsmen started producing sophisticated bronze implements that revolutionized everything from agriculture to warfare. Unlike their stone-using ancestors, these early Minoans, named after the legendary King Minos by modern archaeologists, created flat axes, daggers with elaborate hilts, ceremonial vessels displaying both functional excellence and artistic vision. But here's what's fascinating. The quality of these early bronze objects suggests the technology didn't develop gradually on Crete. Instead, it arrived nearly complete, likely through contact with advanced civilizations in Anatolia or the Levant. Someone brought this knowledge across the sea, transforming Cretan society overnight. The implications were staggering. Bronze production required tin, desperately scarce in the eastern Mediterranean. To obtain it, Cretan merchants had to establish long-distance trade relationships spanning hundreds of kilometers. These weren't simple exchanges, they were the foundation of what would become the ancient world's most extensive commercial network. Archaeological evidence from sites like Moklos reveals the speed of this transformation. The Moklos cemetery tells a story of sudden inequality. Simple pit graves with basic pottery sit alongside elaborate stone-built tombs filled with treasures that would make Egyptian pharaohs envious. Tomb 2, excavated in the early 1900s, contained gold diadems, silver vessels, bronze daggers with ivory handles, and hundreds of stone vessels carved from exotic materials imported from across the Mediterranean. The wealth in this single burial exceeded what ordinary farmers could accumulate in 10 lifetimes. Clearly, some families had discovered how to monopolize the new bronze technology and the trade networks it required. They weren't just wealthy, they were creating a hereditary elite class that would dominate Cretan society for the next 1,000 years. But wealth alone doesn't explain the Minoan miracle. Alongside bronze came pottery innovations that would influence ceramic traditions throughout the Aegean for centuries. The potter's wheel, introduced around 2500 BC, revolutionized production. Suddenly, craftsmen could create vessels with perfect symmetry and unprecedented refinement. The Vasiliki ware exemplifies this mastery. These vessels featured distinctive mottled red and black surfaces created through controlled oxidation and reduction during firing, a technique requiring split-second timing and temperature control that only master craftsmen with decades of experience could achieve. The wide distribution of Vasiliki ware across Crete and throughout the Aegean demonstrates both the high regard for these vessels and the extensive trade networks facilitating their distribution. Yet pottery and bronze were merely preludes. The real transformation involved something more fundamental: specialized craftsmanship. Stone carvers began producing vessels from colorful local stones, serpentine, limestone, breccia, with elaborate handles, spouts, decorative elements requiring extraordinary expertise. Seal carvers created intricate designs on tiny stone objects, serving both practical functions, marking ownership, and symbolic purposes. status symbols, religious objects. The time and skill required to produce such objects reveals something crucial about early Minoan society: full-time specialist craftsmen. This might not sound revolutionary, but consider what it meant. Agricultural surpluses had grown large enough that communities could support people who never planted crops or herded animals. Instead, they spent entire lifetimes perfecting techniques for working bronze, carving stone, throwing pottery. This specialization required social organization far beyond anything seen in Neolithic Europe. Someone had to coordinate surplus collection, distribute food to non-farming specialists, organize trade expeditions to obtain raw materials. The archaeological evidence suggests these coordinators operated from emerging regional centers, particularly three sites that would dominate Cretan history: Knossos, Phaistos, and Malea. Knossos, which excavations beneath the later palace reveal, already showed exceptional development during this early period. Substantial stone-built houses with sophisticated drainage systems, evidence for specialized craft production, storage facilities holding massive ceramic vessels for grain, oil, wine. The settlement covered approximately 25 hectares, one of the largest communities in the entire Aegean region. But Knossos faced competition. Phaistos, commanding the fertile Massara plain in south-central Crete, controlled some of the island's most productive agricultural land. The site's strategic position enabled it to accumulate wealth, demonstrated by elaborate burial goods found in nearby cemeteries, gold jewelry, bronze weapons, imported luxury items. Meanwhile, Malea developed as the primary center for maritime trade on Crete's northern coast. Natural harbors and position along major sea routes connecting Crete with the Cycladic Islands and mainland Greece made it ideal for commercial operations. Archaeological evidence includes substantial residential structures, workshops for bronze working and pottery production, storage facilities suggesting involvement in long-distance trade. These three centers weren't operating in isolation. Trade networks were already reaching extraordinary distances. Obsidian from the island of Iali near Rhodes appeared at sites across Crete, indicating regular maritime contact with the Dodecanese islands. Similarly, obsidian from Melos in the Cyclades reached Cretan communities, demonstrating participation in broader Aegean trade networks. But the trade extended far beyond volcanic glass. Ivory objects found at early Minoan sites originated from elephants in Syria or Egypt. Gold jewelry required raw materials unavailable on Crete, necessitating relationships with regions where gold was mined. Certain stone vessels were carved from materials available only in specific Eastern Mediterranean regions. Think about what this means. By 2500 BC, over 4,000 years ago, Cretan merchants possessed detailed knowledge of Mediterranean geography, seasonal wind patterns, economic conditions of distant markets. They were navigating hundreds of kilometers across open water, negotiating with foreign rulers, establishing commercial protocols that could function across different languages and cultures. The sophistication of these operations required something that would change everything. Writing? Not yet, but soon. Because as trade networks expanded and administrative complexity increased, human memory alone couldn't track the intricate web of obligations, deliveries, storage inventories, and commercial transactions that sustained this emerging civilization. Religious practices were also evolving. Peak sanctuaries, religious sites on prominent mountaintops, began appearing during this period. These weren't individual shrines, but organized religious centers that brought together participants from multiple communities. Accumulations of pottery, bronze figurines, votive offerings suggest formal religious activities transcending individual settlements. The establishment of peak sanctuaries reveals something profound. Religious institutions were integrating dispersed populations under common spiritual practices. Religion wasn't just personal belief, it was becoming social infrastructure, creating bonds between communities that shared sacred spaces even while competing economically. By 2100 BC, Crete possessed all the necessary ingredients for civilization: agricultural surpluses, specialized craftsmen, long-distance trade, social stratification, religious institutions, regional administrative centers. But something was still missing. The transformation into true civilization required one more element: monumental architecture. Around 2000 BC, Minoan communities began constructing massive multi-story structures that would fundamentally transform the island's political, economic, and religious landscape. These weren't just impressive buildings. They embodied a revolutionary approach to urban planning, administrative organization, social coordination that would define Minoan civilization for the next 8 centuries. The first palace at Knossos emerged from extraordinary planning and engineering expertise. Construction began with leveling the Kefala hill. Imagine removing thousands of tons of earth and rock to create stable foundations. The builders then laid out over 1,300 interconnected rooms, corridors, courtyards around a central rectangular court measuring approximately 55 meters. This central court, oriented precisely north-south, became the organizational heart of the entire complex. The precision of this orientation wasn't accidental. It aligned with astronomical phenomena significant in Minoan religious practices. The court could accommodate gatherings of over 1,000 people during religious ceremonies, administrative assemblies, diplomatic receptions. But the real innovation lay in the architecture itself. The structure rose to at least 3 stories, employing sophisticated load-bearing techniques that distributed weight through carefully engineered stone columns and wooden beam systems. The columns themselves became synonymous with Minoan construction, tapering from top to bottom, painted bright red, supporting massive stone lintels, forming frameworks for upper-story construction. Yet even more impressive than the visible architecture were the hidden systems. The builders at Knossos installed an elaborate network of terracotta pipes, stone channels, settling basins, managing both freshwater supply and wastewater removal throughout the complex. The main drainage channel, constructed from precisely fitted stone blocks and covered with removable slabs for maintenance access, could handle substantial water flow during Crete's winter rainy season. Think about this. Over 4,000 years ago, Minoan engineers created water management systems that wouldn't be matched elsewhere in Europe for over a millennium. How did they acquire this knowledge? The answer lies in the storage areas. The Western magazines at Knossos contained hundreds of large ceramic vessels called pithoi, capable of holding thousands of liters of grain, oil, wine. These storage facilities featured stone-lined pits where additional pithoi could be partially buried for temperature control and security. The systematic organization of these areas, with inventories tracked through a newly developed writing system called Linear A, demonstrated administrative capabilities rivaling contemporary civilizations in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Linear A, here's where the mystery deepens. This script consisted of approximately 90 syllabic signs, plus ideographic symbols representing specific commodities, animals, numerical concepts. The tablets recorded everything: agricultural deliveries from surrounding settlements, craft production quotas, religious offerings, personnel assignments. But here's the frustrating part. Despite over a century of study, Linear A remains undeciphered. We can identify the numbers, recognize some commodity symbols, understand the administrative functions, but the underlying language, still unknown. It's possibly related to Anatolian languages, maybe connected to Semitic languages of the Levant, perhaps something else entirely. The limited corpus and predominantly administrative nature of surviving texts make decipherment extraordinarily difficult. What we do know is that the palace at Knossos wasn't alone. Phaistos constructed its own palace during the same period, occupying a commanding position overlooking the fertile Messara plain, western facade providing dramatic views across southern Crete to the Libyan Sea. The builders faced different topographical challenges than their counterparts at Knossos, requiring extensive terracing and retaining wall construction to create level surfaces. The central court at Phaistos measured approximately 55-22 meters, slightly larger than the Knossos court, but following the same north-south orientation. The Western storage magazines contained even larger pithoi than those at Knossos, some vessels capable of holding over 1,000 liters. This reflected the site's role in managing agricultural surpluses from the productive Massara plain. Meanwhile, Malea constructed its palace adapted specifically for maritime trade. Large storage areas near the palace's northern entrance allowed goods arriving by sea to be processed immediately. The palace's proximity to the harbour required special drainage attention. Builders had to prevent both rainwater accumulation and seawater infiltration during storms. Construction techniques at all three major palace sites revealed something remarkable: standardized approaches suggesting coordination between different building projects. Ashlar masonry, stone blocks cut to precise rectangular shapes and fitted together with minimal gaps, appeared at all three palaces. This technique required specialized tools and considerable expertise, indicating that skilled craftsmen moved between construction sites, or that knowledge was systematically shared among building teams. But why build these palaces? The answer transforms our understanding of Minoan society. These weren't royal residences in the traditional sense. They were multifunctional centers combining administrative headquarters, religious sanctuaries, craft production facilities, storage complexes, elite residential quarters, all in one massive architectural complex. Within the palace at Knossos, workshops produced luxury goods for both local use and export trade. Bronze working areas contained sophisticated furnaces capable of reaching temperatures necessary for complex metallurgical processes. Stone carving workshops produced elaborate vessels, seals, architectural elements. Pottery workshops utilized advanced kilns allowing precise temperature control during firing, enabling production of thin-walled, highly decorated ceramics that became hallmarks of Minoan craftsmanship. Religious spaces within the palaces demonstrate the integration of sacred and administrative functions. Snake goddess figurines discovered in old palace period contexts depict women holding serpents while wearing elaborate flounced skirts and fitted bodices exposing their breasts. The clothing matches contemporary fashion shown in palace frescoes, suggesting these represented actual priestesses or deities closely associated with human society. Bull symbolism achieved particular prominence. Bull's head rhytons, ceremonial vessels carved from stone or formed in clay, were used in religious rituals possibly involving consumption of sacred liquids. The careful craftsmanship of these vessels, with naturalistic modeling and inlaid eyes of rock crystal or precious materials, demonstrates the importance of bull symbolism in Minoan religious practice. But bulls weren't just symbols. Archaeological evidence suggests live bulls played active roles in religious ceremonies conducted in palace courtyards. Fresco fragments from various palace contexts depict scenes of bull leaping, acrobatic performers vaulting over charging bulls in displays combining religious significance with athletic spectacle. These activities required specially trained athletes who spent years developing precise timing and physical coordination necessary to survive encounters with animals weighing over 500 kilograms. Imagine the ceremony, the central court at Knossos, its precise north-south orientation aligned with sacred directions. Thousands gathered, palace officials, foreign dignitaries, ordinary citizens, granted access to witness this holy event. The bull, massive and unpredictable, released into the court. The athlete, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, running alongside the charging animal, grasping its horns, using the bull's forward momentum to propel themselves upward, vaulting over its back in a death-defying leap. The religious significance extended beyond athletic display. The bull represented untamed natural power that could be channeled but never fully controlled by human intelligence and training. Successful completion demonstrated the performer's spiritual worthiness and physical courage, qualities highly valued in Minoan society. These ceremonies likely occurred during specific seasonal festivals when agricultural communities sought divine favor for successful harvests or protection from natural disasters. The integration of religion with agriculture, administration with ceremony, practical function with sacred purpose. This was the genius of Minoan palace civilization. But the Old Palace period wouldn't last. Around 1700 BC, disaster struck. Archaeological evidence from sites across Crete reveals a complex pattern of destruction. At Knossos, collapsed walls, scattered pottery, burned storage areas. At Phaistos, evidence of deliberate dismantling, valuable objects removed before final conflagration. What happened? Earthquakes seem likely. Crete's location along active fault lines makes the island susceptible to major seismic events. Archaeological evidence includes collapsed walls, tilted columns, foundation damage consistent with severe earthquakes. The sophisticated drainage systems and multi-story construction, while impressive engineering achievements, may have made palace complexes particularly vulnerable due to their size and complexity. But here's where the Minoan story becomes even more remarkable. The response to catastrophe demonstrated extraordinary resilience and organizational capability. Within decades of the destructions, construction crews were clearing rubble, salvaging usable materials, laying foundations for palace complexes that would surpass their predecessors in both scale and sophistication. The New Palace period, spanning from approximately 1700 to 1450 BC, witnessed Minoan civilization reach unprecedented heights of artistic achievement, technological innovation, Mediterranean influence. The reconstruction of Knossos represented one of the most ambitious architectural projects in Bronze Age Europe. Rather than simply rebuilding damaged sections, builders completely reimagined the palace layout, creating a complex covering nearly 3 hectares, rising to 4 stories in some areas. The new design incorporated lessons learned from earlier structural vulnerabilities while introducing architectural innovations that would influence Mediterranean construction techniques for centuries. The western facade presented an imposing sight to visitors approaching from the main road. Massive limestone blocks, some weighing over 5 tons, formed foundation walls supporting upper stories constructed from carefully fitted ashlar masonry. The builders employed sophisticated lifting techniques using bronze tools, wooden levers, rope systems to position these enormous stones with millimeter precision. Interior spaces displayed unprecedented luxury and functional sophistication. The throne room, located on the ground floor of the western wing, featured elaborate gypsum benches flanked by restored frescoes depicting griffins in landscapes of flowering plants. The throne itself, carved from a single block of gypsum featuring a distinctive high back with undulating curves, represented the pinnacle of Minoan stone carving artistry. But the most spectacular architectural feature was the grand staircase. This remarkable structure descended 4 flights through the eastern wing, each landing opening onto different residential and administrative areas. Massive stone steps were supported by distinctive Minoan columns, tapering from top to bottom, painted bright red, topped with black cushion capitals. Natural light filtered down through a central light well measuring approximately 6 or 4 meters, illuminating the staircase while creating a vertical air circulation system, maintaining comfortable temperatures year-round. The engineering knowledge required to design this system was extraordinary. The light well-created pressure differentials that drew fresh air through ground-level openings and exhausted stale air through rooftop vents. The system's effectiveness depended on precise calculations of shaft dimensions, opening sizes, airflow patterns, advanced understanding of fluid dynamics principles that wouldn't be formally understood for millennia. Storage facilities in the reconstructed palace demonstrated the enormous scale of economic activities. The Western magazines contained over 400 pithoi with combined capacity exceeding 75,000 litres, sufficient to store grain for several thousand people throughout an entire year. Stone-lined cists built into magazine floors provided additional storage for valuable commodities like saffron, precious metals, imported luxury goods. But the true glory of the New Palace period lay in its artistic achievements. Fresco painting reached unprecedented sophistication, transforming palace walls into vibrant displays of Minoan life, religious beliefs, natural observations. The technical mastery displayed required specialized knowledge of pigment preparation, plaster application, painting techniques, enabling artists to create works of remarkable durability and visual impact. The bull leaping fresco exemplifies this excellence. 3 athletic figures engaged in the dangerous sport, one grasping the bull's horns while preparing to vault, another captured mid-leap above the animal, a third positioned to assist with the landing. And the artist captured split-second timing, muscular tension, graceful athleticism, spiritual significance of this spectacular performance. The composition demonstrates sophisticated understanding of movement, proportion, dramatic impact. The bull's massive body occupies the central portion, powerful muscles rendered with anatomical accuracy, conveying the animal's strength and unpredictable nature. The dolphin fresco from the Queen's Megaron transformed architectural space into an underwater paradise. Dolphins played among colorful fish, sea urchins, aquatic plants covering all 4 walls, creating an immersive environment where viewers felt surrounded by the sea itself. The artist's detailed knowledge of marine ecosystems enabled accurate depiction of complex relationships between different species and their underwater habitats. Individual dolphins displayed remarkable naturalistic accuracy, distinctive bottle-shaped snouts, streamlined bodies, curved dorsal fins enabling identification of specific dolphin species found in Mediterranean waters. Swimming poses varied throughout the composition, some dolphins depicted in graceful arcing leaps, others in relaxed horizontal positions, suggesting natural movement patterns. This wasn't just decoration, it was a statement about Minoan identity. These were a people of the sea whose prosperity depended on maritime trade, whose world extended across the Mediterranean. The frescoes proclaimed this connection, transforming palace interiors into celebrations of marine life. But artistic achievement extended beyond frescoes. Pottery production during the New Palace period culminated in some of the finest ceramics ever produced in the ancient world. Marine motifs dominated. Octopus stirrup jars displayed remarkable naturalistic accuracy, tentacles flowing gracefully around vessel surfaces in compositions enhancing the pot's 3-dimensional forms. The artists possessed detailed knowledge of octopus anatomy and behavior, accurately rendering muscular tentacles, bulbous heads, distinctive eye structures with precision rivaling modern biological illustrations. This wasn't stylized decoration, it was scientific observation transformed into art. Metalwork achieved exceptional sophistication. Bronze workers developed alloy compositions, optimizing mechanical properties for specific applications while achieving distinctive visual effects through controlled surface treatments. The famous bee pendant from Malea demonstrated mastery of granulation techniques, tiny gold spheres fused to larger surfaces creating textured decorative effects of remarkable delicacy and precision. The technical requirements for successful granulation involve precise temperature control during heating operations that fused small gold spheres without melting them completely or damaging underlying surfaces. This technique required specialized tools, controlled atmosphere furnaces, exceptional manual dexterity developed through years of training and practice. The artistic effects achieved through granulation created jewelry of unprecedented sophistication, establishing new standards for luxury goods production throughout the ancient world. Stone carving during the New Palace period achieved remarkable sophistication in working both local Cretan materials and exotic stones imported from throughout the Mediterranean. Craftsmen developed specialized tools and techniques, enabling them to work successfully with materials ranging from soft serpentine and limestone to extremely hard rocks including porphyry, basalt, various types of quartz. Seal carving represented perhaps the most technically demanding application of Minoan stonework skills. Artists created detailed compositions within tiny surfaces of personal seals, measuring only a few centimeters in diameter. The hardest stones were preferred because they provided sharp, clear impressions and resisted wear during repeated use. Working these resistant materials required diamond-pointed tools and abrasive techniques, enabling precise cutting of fine details despite extreme hardness. The artistic compositions demonstrated remarkable creativity in adapting complex narrative scenes to constraints of tiny circular or oval surfaces. Religious scenes depicted on Minoan seals provide valuable insights into ceremonial practices and spiritual beliefs. Tree worship ceremonies appeared frequently, showing female figures performing ritual dances around sacred trees while holding various ceremonial objects. These miniature compositions included accurate botanical details and costume elements demonstrating the artist's detailed knowledge of both natural phenomena and cultural practices. But this artistic and economic flourishing wasn't confined to Crete. Minoan influence during the New Palace period extended far beyond the island to encompass much of the Aegean Sea and parts of the eastern Mediterranean. Archaeological evidence from the Cycladic Islands reveals extensive Minoan settlement and cultural influence that transformed local societies. On Thera, Minoan colonists established Akrotiri, a prosperous town adopting Minoan architectural styles, artistic conventions, administrative practices while maintaining connections with the Cretan homeland. The settlement at Akrotiri displayed sophisticated urban planning reflecting Minoan expertise in creating functional and beautiful living environments. Multi-story houses built from local stone incorporated Minoan architectural features including light wells, drainage systems, distinctive column styles. The town's streets were paved with stone slabs, equipped with covered drains managing both rainwater and household waste. Frescoes from Akrotiri demonstrated the spread of Minoan artistic traditions beyond Crete while revealing local adaptations and innovations. The fisherman fresco depicted a nude male figure carrying strings of fish, combining Minoan artistic techniques with subject matter specific to the island's maritime economy. The spring fresco transformed an entire room into a landscape of flowering lilies and swallows, creating an immersive natural environment rivaling the finest palace decorations on Crete. Evidence for Minoan influence on mainland Greece appears at numerous sites where Minoan pottery, artistic motifs, architectural features have been discovered. At Pylos, Minoan-style frescoes decorated walls of what would later become a major Mycenaean palace. These paintings included marine themes, religious symbols, decorative patterns closely paralleling contemporary Cretan art. Trade relationships with Egypt reached new levels of complexity and mutual benefit during the New Palace period. Egyptian tomb paintings from the reigns of Thutmose III and Amenhotep II depicted Minoan ambassadors presenting elaborate gifts to pharaonic officials, decorated pottery, bronze weapons, exotic animals. These diplomatic exchanges facilitated regular commercial contact, bringing Egyptian gold, ivory, precious stones to Crete in exchange for Minoan manufactured goods and raw materials. Minoan merchants established permanent trading posts along the Levantine coast where they could coordinate commercial activities with local partners. At Ugarit, a major Syrian port city, Minoan pottery appeared in such quantities that it suggests resident Minoan traders rather than occasional visits. These trading posts served as intermediaries between Cretan producers and Eastern Mediterranean markets, facilitating exchange of goods, technologies, ideas across cultural boundaries. But this prosperity, this artistic flowering, this commercial dominance wouldn't last. Around 1450 BC, catastrophe struck again. Archaeological evidence from sites across Crete reveals a complex pattern of destruction and abandonment. At Knossos, excavations uncovered clear signs of violent destruction: collapsed walls, scattered pottery, burned storage areas containing accidentally fired Linear A tablets. The palace's Western magazines showed evidence of intense fires reaching temperatures sufficient to melt bronze objects and crack massive stone blocks, indicating conflagrations far more severe than typical accidental blazes. At Phaistos, evidence of deliberate dismantling of architectural elements, removal of valuable objects before the final conflagration. Storage areas that once contained hundreds of pithoi filled with agricultural products showed signs of hasty evacuation. Many vessels found broken and scattered as if contents had been rapidly extracted or abandoned during flight. At Malea, the palace complex showed evidence of multiple phases of damage and partial reconstruction, indicating the site experienced repeated disruptions over several decades before final abandonment. Workshop areas contained partially completed objects and scattered tools, suggesting craft production ceased suddenly without time for orderly closure of operations. What caused this widespread destruction? The debate has raged among scholars for decades. The eruption of Thera, a volcanic island approximately 100 kilometers north of Crete, has been suggested as a primary factor. This massive volcanic explosion, dated to approximately 1628 BC through ice core analysis and radiocarbon dating, was one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history, ejecting an estimated 60 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere and creating tsunamis that would have devastated coastal settlements throughout the Aegean region. But here's the problem. Current dating evidence suggests the eruption occurred around 1628 BC, while the major palace destructions appear to have taken place around 1450 BC, creating a gap of nearly 2 centuries that's difficult to reconcile with direct causal relationships. Some scholars argue the volcanic disaster initiated gradual decline that culminated in palace destructions. Others contend the eruption and palace destructions represent separate events with different underlying causes. Earthquakes represent another natural factor that may have contributed to Minoan decline. Crete's location along active fault lines makes the island susceptible to major earthquakes that could cause widespread structural damage. The sophisticated drainage systems and multi-story construction employed in Minoan architecture, while impressive engineering achievements may have made palace complexes particularly vulnerable to earthquake damage due to their size and complexity. Evidence of repeated reconstruction and repair activities at major Minoan sites throughout the Late Bronze Age suggests ongoing efforts to repair and modify palace structures in response to periodic damage. These reconstruction activities indicate that Minoan communities possessed the technical expertise and organizational capacity to recover from natural disasters, but repeated seismic events could have gradually weakened both physical infrastructure and economic resources necessary for maintaining palace-centered civilization. Internal social and political factors may have contributed to Minoan decline through processes that made the civilization more vulnerable to external pressures or natural disasters. The highly centralized administrative systems that enabled Minoan palaces to coordinate complex economic activities also created potential points of failure if key personnel or institutions were disrupted. Evidence for internal conflicts during the late Minoan period includes construction of defensive walls and fortifications at some sites that had previously been undefended. The settlement at Gornia shows evidence of hastily constructed defensive barriers utilizing stone salvaged from earlier buildings, suggesting emergency responses to perceived military threats. But the most significant transformation came from outside, the emergence of Mycenaean Greek influence on Crete. This fundamentally altered the island's political organization, administrative systems, material culture. Archaeological evidence from Knossos and other sites reveals gradual adoption of Mycenaean pottery styles, architectural features, burial practices indicating either peaceful cultural assimilation or military conquest by mainland Greek populations. The transition from Linear A to Linear B script for administrative record-keeping marks a crucial linguistic shift, reflecting replacement of Minoan administrative personnel with Greek-speaking bureaucrats. Mycenaean influence appears first in the archaeological record around 1450 BC, coinciding with the major destruction events that ended the New Palace period at most Minoan sites. At Knossos, however, the palace continued to function under what appears to be Mycenaean control, with Linear B tablets recording administrative activities following Greek linguistic patterns, while maintaining many traditional Minoan bureaucratic procedures. This continuity suggests Mycenaean takeover involved adoption and adaptation of existing administrative systems rather than complete replacement. The Mycenaean presence on Crete manifested through several distinct material culture changes archaeologists can trace in the stratigraphic record. Pottery assemblages from post-1450 BC contexts show increasing percentages of mainland Greek vessel types, stirrup jars, kylikes, other forms characteristic of Mycenaean ceramic traditions. These vessels often display decorative motifs derived from Minoan artistic traditions, though many examples show hybrid characteristics combining Greek and Minoan design elements. Burial practices provide particularly clear evidence for cultural transformation. Traditional Minoan burial customs, typically involving collective interments in chamber tombs or tholos structures, were gradually replaced by individual graves following Mycenaean practices. Grave goods from these later burials include weapons, armor, personal ornaments reflecting Mycenaean material culture and social values, contrasting sharply with the predominantly peaceful character of earlier Minoan burial assemblages. The transformation of palace functions under Mycenaean control involved significant changes in administrative priorities and record-keeping practices. Linear B tablets from Knossos record detailed inventories of military equipment, chariots, weapons, armor, suggesting a more militarized administrative system than had characterized earlier Minoan palace operations. Personnel records emphasize military titles and hierarchical relationships, reflecting the warrior-aristocrat social structure typical of Mycenaean civilization. But the decline of distinctly Minoan cultural practices occurred gradually over several centuries as local traditions were absorbed into the broader Mycenaean cultural sphere. Traditional Minoan artistic motifs, marine themes, floral decorations, religious symbols continued to appear in late Minoan art, but with modifications reflecting Greek aesthetic preferences and cultural values. The sophisticated naturalistic style that had characterized new palace period art gave way to more stylized and geometric approaches aligning with Mycenaean artistic traditions. Yet even as Minoan political independence ended, Minoan cultural influence continued. The complex process of cultural transformation that reshaped late Minoan Crete didn't mark the end of Minoan influence on Mediterranean civilization. It initiated a remarkable journey of cultural transmission that would carry Minoan traditions, technologies, memories across centuries and continents. As Mycenaean Greek administrators assumed control over Cretan palace centers, and Linear B scribes replaced their Linear A predecessors, fundamental elements of Minoan civilization became embedded within the emerging Greek cultural framework, creating a legacy that would profoundly influence classical antiquity and continue to shape European civilization into the modern era. The preservation of Minoan traditions within Greek mythology represents one of the most enduring aspects of this cultural transmission, transforming historical memories of Bronze Age Crete into legendary narratives that captured the imagination of later generations. The figure of King Minos, whose name scholars believe derives from a Minoan royal title rather than representing a single historical individual, became central to Greek mythological traditions, preserving distorted but recognizable echoes of actual Minoan practices and beliefs. Classical Greek sources describe Minos as a powerful sea king who ruled a maritime empire from his palace at Knossos, demanding tribute from subject territories throughout the Aegean region in arrangements closely paralleling the administrative systems documented in Linear A tablets. The legendary labyrinth of Knossos, described in Greek mythology as an elaborate maze constructed to contain the monstrous Minotaur, appears to preserve folk memories of the actual palace complex, with its confusing layout of interconnected rooms, corridors, courtyards that could easily disorient unfamiliar visitors. The Greek word labyrinth itself derives from labris, the double axe, that served as a sacred symbol throughout Minoan religious practices, suggesting that the mythological maze represented a transformed memory of the palace as a center of religious authority and ceremonial activities. And the Minotaur legend, describing a creature half bull and half human dwelling within the labyrinth and demanding human sacrifice, likely preserves distorted memories of the bull-leaping ceremonies central to Minoan religious practices. The dangerous athletic performances where young athletes vaulted over charging bulls in palace courtyards would have impressed foreign observers as supernatural feats requiring divine intervention or monstrous participation. The tribute of young men and women that Athens supposedly paid to feed the Minotaur may reflect actual practices where subject communities provided personnel for these ceremonial activities, with the inherent dangers of bull leaping transformed in later memory into deliberate human sacrifice. Theseus's victory over the Minotaur and subsequent escape from the labyrinth with the help of Ariadne's thread represents a mythologized version of the Mycenaean takeover of Minoan Crete, the Greek hero symbolizing the mainland conquerors who ended the power of the Minoan sea kings. Ariadne, whose name appears to be of pre-Greek origin and may derive from Minoan religious terminology, represents the local assistance that enabled Mycenaean success, possibly reflecting actual alliances between Greek newcomers and elements of the Minoan elite who facilitated the transition of power. The influence of Minoan artistic traditions on later Greek art manifested through multiple channels of transmission that carried Bronze Age aesthetic principles into classical antiquity. Mycenaean artists who worked on Crete during the late Minoan period absorbed Minoan techniques and design concepts which they subsequently transmitted to mainland Greece and incorporated into developing Greek artistic traditions. The naturalistic representation of marine life that characterized the finest Minoan pottery and frescoes influenced Greek ceramic decoration for centuries. Dolphin motifs, octopus designs, other sea creatures remaining popular elements in Greek artistic repertoires long after their original Minoan contexts had been forgotten. Architectural influences from Minoan palace construction appeared in various forms throughout later Greek building traditions, though often transformed beyond easy recognition through adaptation to different functional requirements and aesthetic preferences. The concept of organizing large architectural complexes around central courtyards, fundamental to Minoan palace design, influenced the development of Greek agora layouts and the planning of major sanctuary sites like Olympia and Delphi. The sophisticated drainage and water management systems pioneered by Minoan engineers provided technical knowledge that influenced later Greek urban planning, particularly in the design of fountain houses and public bath facilities. The distinctive Minoan column design with shafts tapering from top to bottom and distinctive cushion capitals influenced the development of Greek architectural orders through complex processes of cultural transmission and artistic evolution. But perhaps the most profound Minoan legacy lay in something less tangible than architecture or art: the demonstration that advanced civilization could flourish in Europe. Before the rediscovery of Minoan civilization by Sir Arthur Evans beginning in 1900 AD, the prevailing assumption was that European culture originated primarily from Near Eastern influences, that the first advanced societies developed in Mesopotamia and Egypt before gradually spreading westward. Evans's excavations at Knossos, conducted over 3 decades with unprecedented scale and systematic methodology, revealed the existence of a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that predated classical Greek culture by over a millennium. The discovery challenged prevailing assumptions about the development of European civilization and demonstrated that advanced urban societies had flourished in the Aegean region long before the traditionally recognized beginnings of Greek history. The revelation that Europe's first advanced civilization had developed on Crete rather than in the traditionally emphasized regions of Mesopotamia or Egypt shifted scholarly attention to the Mediterranean as a crucial zone of cultural innovation and exchange. The sophisticated artistic achievements and apparently peaceful character of Minoan civilization, as interpreted by Evans and his contemporaries, provided an alternative model of ancient society that contrasted sharply with the militaristic emphasis of other Bronze Age civilizations. Yet Evans's reconstruction methods at Knossos, while groundbreaking in their ambition and scope, established precedents for archaeological presentation that remain controversial among modern scholars. His decision to rebuild substantial portions of the palace using modern materials and artistic interpretations created a tourist attraction that brought Minoan civilization to public attention, but also introduced elements that may not accurately reflect ancient realities. The famous frescoes that visitors see today at Knossos combine authentic ancient fragments with extensive modern restoration work that reflects early 20th century artistic sensibilities as much as Bronze Age aesthetic principles. This has created ongoing debates about authenticity, interpretation, the responsibilities of archaeologists in presenting the past to the public. Contemporary scholarly debates about Minoan society reflect the complexity of interpreting archaeological evidence from a civilization that left no deciphered historical records and whose cultural practices differed significantly from better documented ancient societies. Questions about gender roles in Minoan society have generated extensive discussion, with some scholars interpreting the prominent female figures in Minoan art as evidence for matriarchal social organization, while others argue for more conventional patriarchal structures where women held significant religious authority but limited political power. The absence of clearly identifiable male rulers in Minoan iconography contrasts sharply with contemporary civilizations, where royal imagery typically emphasized masculine authority and military prowess. This has led some researchers to suggest that Minoan society accorded women greater political and economic power than other Bronze Age civilizations, though others caution against over-interpreting artistic evidence that may reflect religious rather than political realities. The nature of Minoan political organization remains equally controversial, with ongoing debates about whether the palace centers functioned as independent city-states or as regional administrative centers within a unified island kingdom. Linear A records suggest complex administrative hierarchies and territorial relationships, but the undeciphered nature of the script prevents definitive conclusions about political structures. Recent archaeological discoveries have complicated traditional interpretations of Minoan society by revealing evidence for social stratification, economic inequality, possibly violent conflicts that contrast with earlier scholarly emphasis on Minoan peacefulness and egalitarianism. Excavations at sites like Chania and Archaean have uncovered evidence for defensive fortifications and destruction layers, suggesting internal conflicts or external threats during various periods of Minoan history. These findings have prompted reassessment of Minoan society as a more complex and potentially conflict-prone civilization than previously recognized. The dating and impact of the Thera eruption continue to generate scholarly controversy with significant implications for understanding Minoan decline and the broader chronology of late Bronze Age Mediterranean history. Scientific analysis of ice cores from Greenland and tree rings from ancient bristlecone pines has established that the massive volcanic eruption occurred around 1628 BC, significantly earlier than the 1450 BC date for major Minoan palace destructions. This chronological gap has forced scholars to reconsider the relationship between natural disasters and cultural collapse, with current research suggesting that the eruption initiated gradual decline rather than causing immediate civilization collapse. Environmental archaeology has provided new insights into the complex interactions between natural disasters, climate change, cultural transformation that characterize the late Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean. Analysis of pollen cores, marine sediments, archaeological deposits has revealed patterns of environmental change that coincided with major cultural transitions throughout the region. These studies suggest that Minoan decline occurred within a broader context of regional instability that affected multiple civilizations simultaneously, indicating that local factors on Crete interacted with Mediterranean-wide phenomena to produce the observed cultural transformations. Climate shifts may have disrupted agricultural systems that sustained palace economies, while environmental stress could have exacerbated social tensions and political instabilities. Yet despite the collapse of palace-centered civilization, despite the Mycenaean takeover, despite the transformation and eventual disappearance of distinctly Minoan cultural practices, the legacy of Minoan civilization extends far beyond its direct historical influence. The discovery and study of Minoan culture demonstrated the complexity and sophistication of Bronze Age European societies, challenging evolutionary models that portrayed ancient history as a linear progression from primitive to advanced civilizations. The recognition that sophisticated urban societies had flourished in prehistoric Europe provided crucial evidence for understanding the deep historical roots of European cultural development. Contemporary applications of Minoan research extend into multiple fields, including urban planning, environmental management, sustainable development, as where ancient Minoan solutions to practical challenges provide insights relevant to modern problems. The sophisticated water management systems developed by Minoan engineers offer models for sustainable urban infrastructure, while their approaches to integrating human settlements with natural environments provide examples of environmentally sensitive development practices. The economic systems that enabled Minoan civilization to flourish for over a millennium demonstrate principles of resource management and international cooperation that remain relevant to contemporary global challenges. The Minoan achievement in creating extensive trade networks without apparent military conquest, organizing commercial exchange through diplomatic relationships, cultural influence, economic incentives rather than force, offers alternative models for international relations. The continuing mystery of the undeciphered Linear A script represents one of archaeology's greatest puzzles, with potential implications extending far beyond Minoan studies to encompass broader questions about language development, cultural transmission, the relationship between writing systems, and social organization. Advances in computational linguistics and digital analysis techniques offer new possibilities for decipherment efforts, while expanded archaeological excavations continue to provide additional Linear A texts that may eventually yield the breakthrough necessary for understanding this crucial aspect of Minoan culture. The preservation and presentation of Minoan archaeological sites face ongoing challenges that reflect broader issues in cultural heritage management and sustainable tourism development. The popularity of Minoan sites among international visitors creates opportunities for economic development and cultural education, while also generating pressures that threaten the long-term preservation of irreplaceable archaeological remains. Balancing public access with conservation requirements represents a continuing challenge that requires innovative approaches to site management and visitor education. Modern conservation techniques, including digital reconstruction, virtual reality presentations, protective shelters, enable public engagement while minimizing physical impact on fragile archaeological materials. The influence of Minoan civilization on contemporary culture extends beyond academic research to encompass artistic inspiration, literary creation, popular imagination in ways that demonstrate the enduring appeal of this remarkable Bronze Age society. Modern artists, writers, filmmakers continue to draw inspiration from Minoan themes, creating contemporary works that reinterpret ancient motifs for modern audiences, while contributing to ongoing cultural dialogue about the relationship between past and present. The Minoan aesthetic, characterized by naturalistic representation of marine life, flowing organic forms, integration of art with architecture, sophisticated color palettes, continues to influence contemporary design across multiple media. Interior designers incorporate Minoan-inspired motifs. Architects adapt ancient water management principles. Artists explore themes of human-nature relationships that resonate with Minoan spiritual practices. The story of the Minoans, from their emergence as Europe's first advanced civilization through their transformation and ultimate absorption into the broader Greek cultural world, represents one of the most remarkable chapters in human history. Their achievements in art, architecture, technology, social organization established foundations that would influence Mediterranean civilization for millennia, while their peaceful and sophisticated approach to urban life provided alternative models of social development that continue to inspire contemporary thinking about sustainable and equitable societies. Consider what they accomplished. On a relatively small island with limited natural resources, they created a civilization that dominated Mediterranean trade for over 1,000 years, developed sophisticated artistic traditions that influenced cultures from Egypt to mainland Greece, engineered water management systems that wouldn't be matched in Europe for over a millennium, established administrative practices that coordinated complex economic activities across extensive territories, created religious institutions that integrated diverse communities under common spiritual practices. They did this without apparent militarization, without extensive fortifications until the very end, through cultural influence and commercial relationships rather than conquest. This suggests alternative paths to civilization building, different models for organizing complex societies. Yet they also demonstrate civilization's fragility. Despite their achievements, despite their sophistication, despite their extensive trade networks and administrative capabilities, they couldn't survive the combination of natural disasters, external pressures, internal vulnerabilities that accumulated during the 15th century BC. The palace-centered system that had enabled such remarkable cultural flowering also created vulnerabilities. Centralization that became a point of failure when key institutions were disrupted, specialization that required continuous coordination and became dysfunctional when administrative systems broke down. The Mycenaean takeover wasn't simply conquest, it was cultural transformation, where Greek elements merged with Minoan traditions to create something new. The process demonstrates how civilizations don't simply end, but transform, with elements persisting, recombining, influencing successor cultures in ways that extend far beyond political control or military dominance. This is perhaps the most important lesson from the Minoan story. Cultural influence operates on different timescales and through different mechanisms than political power. The Minoan palaces fell in 1450 BC, but Minoan artistic traditions influenced Greek culture for centuries. Minoan architectural innovations shaped Mediterranean building practices for millennia. Minoan religious concepts became embedded in Greek mythology. Minoan commercial practices established precedents for international trade that persisted long after the civilization itself had transformed. Even today, over 3,000 years after the collapse of Minoan palace civilization, we continue to draw inspiration and insights from their achievements. Their water management systems inform modern, sustainable infrastructure design. Their artistic achievements inspire contemporary creators. Their commercial networks provide historical examples of extensive international trade operating without military empire. Their religious practices offer alternative models of spiritual expression, emphasizing natural forces and female divine power. The mystery of Linear A remains unsolved, tantalizing scholars with the possibility that somewhere in those undeciphered tablets lies information that could transform our understanding of Bronze Age Mediterranean civilization. Perhaps the script will be deciphered in our lifetimes through advances in computational linguistics, discovery of bilingual texts, or breakthroughs in comparative analysis. Perhaps it will remain mysterious, preserving forever some aspects of Minoan culture that we can only glimpse through material remains and artistic achievements. But whether or not Linear A yields its secrets, the Minoans have already taught us invaluable lessons about human creativity, adaptability, resilience. They showed that civilization could develop in Europe not just as an import from the Near East, but as an indigenous achievement building on local traditions and innovations. They demonstrated that sophisticated urban culture could be organized around principles other than military might and territorial conquest. They proved that artistic excellence and technical innovation could flourish in small-scale societies, that extensive international trade could operate through diplomatic relationships and cultural exchange rather than imperial domination, that religious practices could integrate communities across diverse territories without centralized temple hierarchies like those in Egypt and Mesopotamia. The archaeological recovery of Minoan civilization represents one of the great achievements of modern scholarship, transforming our understanding of European prehistory, establishing new standards for systematic excavation and analysis, demonstrating the power of interdisciplinary collaboration between archaeologists, art historians, linguists, scientists in reconstructing ancient cultures. Yet this recovery also reminds us of interpretation's challenges. Evans's reconstructions at Knossos, while bringing Minoan civilization to public attention, also introduced modern assumptions and artistic preferences that may distort our understanding of ancient realities. Ongoing debates about Minoan social organization, political structures, gender roles demonstrate how the same archaeological evidence can support multiple interpretations. This uncertainty shouldn't discourage us. It should inspire continued research, ongoing questioning, willingness to revise interpretations as new evidence emerges. The Minoan story continues to unfold through new excavations, advanced analytical techniques, fresh theoretical perspectives. Recent discoveries at sites like Zominthos, a large building complex in the mountains of central Crete, continue to expand our understanding of Minoan settlement patterns and social organization. Excavations at coastal sites are revealing more about Minoan maritime activities and harbor infrastructure. Analysis of preserved organic materials using modern scientific techniques provides insights into Minoan diet, agriculture, environmental conditions. Genetic studies of ancient DNA from Minoan burial sites are beginning to shed light on population movements, relationships between Crete and other Mediterranean regions, biological aspects of the people who created this remarkable civilization. These studies suggest that the Minoans were descended from Neolithic populations that had inhabited Crete for thousands of years, with some genetic input from Anatolian and other Eastern Mediterranean populations. The integration of multiple lines of evidence, archaeological, artistic, architectural, biological, environmental, creates increasingly sophisticated and nuanced pictures of Minoan society. We understand now that the Minoans weren't a single uniform culture, but a diverse civilization with regional variations that changed significantly over the 2 millennia, from earliest Bronze Age developments to the Mycenaean takeover. We recognize that their society included significant social stratification, with marked differences in wealth and status, that their economy combined palace-centered redistribution with private trade and craft production. that their religious practices encompassed both centralized ceremonies at palace sanctuaries and local traditions at peak sanctuaries and caves. We appreciate that their artistic achievements reflected not just aesthetic preferences but complex cultural meanings, religious symbolism, social values, economic relationships, environmental knowledge, all encoded in pottery decoration, fresco painting, seal carving, architectural design. We understand that their commercial networks weren't simply about exchanging goods, but involved diplomatic relationships, cultural exchange, transmission of technologies and ideas that influenced civilizations throughout the Mediterranean world. The Minoan merchants who traveled to Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, possibly even the Western Mediterranean, weren't just traders, they were cultural ambassadors. These merchants carried with them Minoan pottery, metalwork, artistic motifs that influenced local traditions in distant lands. They brought back not just raw materials and luxury goods, but also ideas, technologies, artistic styles that enriched Minoan culture. This cultural exchange operated in multiple directions, with influences flowing between Crete and other Mediterranean regions in complex patterns of mutual influence. The collapse of Minoan palace civilization around 1450 BC didn't end this cultural exchange, it transformed it. Under Mycenaean control, Crete remained an important center for craft production and commerce, though now integrated into broader Greek commercial networks. Minoan artistic traditions continued to influence Mycenaean art. Minoan religious practices merged with Greek spiritual concepts. Minoan technologies were adopted and adapted by Greek craftsmen. This cultural continuity through political transformation demonstrates civilization's resilience and adaptability. Cultures don't simply disappear when political systems collapse. They transform, merge, recombine, persist through changed circumstances. Elements of Minoan civilization survived the Bronze Age collapse that devastated the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BC, persisted through the Greek Dark Ages, influenced the emergence of classical Greek civilization that would dominate the Mediterranean in later centuries. The bull symbolism that had been central to Minoan religion reappeared in Greek mythology through stories of the Minotaur, Europa, and the bull, Poseidon's sacred bulls. The female deities prominent in Minoan iconography influenced the development of Greek goddesses like Athena, Artemis, Demeter. The artistic traditions of naturalistic representation and integration of art with architecture that characterized Minoan palace decoration influenced Greek temple design and decoration. The commercial practices and maritime expertise developed by Minoan merchants provided foundations for later Greek domination of Mediterranean trade. The administrative techniques recorded in Linear A tablets influenced Mycenaean bureaucratic practices, which in turn shaped later Greek approaches to economic management and record-keeping. Even the physical infrastructure created by Minoan civilization continued to influence later developments. The palace at Knossos remained an important site through the Greek and Roman periods, though its function transformed from administrative center to cult location associated with mythological traditions. The harbor facilities, road systems, agricultural terraces created by Minoan communities continued to shape settlement patterns and economic activities on Crete for centuries after the civilization's collapse. The environmental legacy of Minoan civilization includes both positive and negative aspects. The sophisticated water management systems demonstrated sustainable approaches to resource utilization that modern societies can learn from. The integration of settlements with natural landscapes showed environmental sensitivity that contrasts with more destructive development patterns. However, intensive agricultural exploitation and deforestation to support palace economies may have contributed to environmental degradation that exacerbated the civilization's vulnerabilities to natural disasters and climate change. The lessons here are complex. The Minoans achieved remarkable sustainability in some areas while potentially over-exploiting resources in others, demonstrating that even sophisticated societies can face environmental challenges. The social lessons from Minoan civilization are equally complex. The apparently greater role of women in Minoan religious and possibly political life offers alternative models to the strict patriarchy characteristic of many ancient civilizations. However, the significant social stratification evident in burial practices and residential patterns reminds us that gender equality doesn't necessarily correlate with economic equality or social justice. The Minoan achievement in maintaining extensive commercial networks without apparent military empire suggests that international cooperation and exchange can operate through diplomatic and economic mechanisms rather than conquest. Yet the vulnerability of this system to disruption, whether from natural disasters, internal conflicts, or external invasions, demonstrates the fragility of commercial-based power structures. The artistic and technological achievements of Minoan civilization inspire admiration while raising questions about the social costs of such accomplishments. The magnificent palaces, exquisite frescoes, sophisticated crafts required not just skilled artisans but also systems for mobilizing labor, concentrating resources, supporting specialized workers. The Linear A tablets reveal administrative systems tracking deliveries, quotas, personnel assignments, with precision that implies considerable social control. This tension between admiration for cultural achievements and recognition of potential social costs characterizes much modern engagement with ancient civilizations. We celebrate Minoan art while questioning the labor systems that produced it, admire the palaces while wondering about the lives of those who built them, appreciate the extensive trade networks while considering their environmental and social impacts. These questions don't diminish Minoan achievements. They situate them within broader human experiences of creativity, innovation, social organization, and the complex relationships between cultural flowering and social structures. The Minoans were neither utopian peacekeepers nor exploitative militarists, but complex human societies navigating challenges, making choices, creating culture within specific historical and environmental contexts. Their story reminds us that human societies have always been creative, innovative, capable of remarkable achievements, while also facing challenges, making mistakes, dealing with unintended consequences of their actions. The Minoans developed sophisticated technologies, created beautiful art, established extensive commercial networks, organized complex administrative systems, and also faced environmental challenges, social inequalities, political vulnerabilities that eventually contributed to their civilization's transformation. Understanding Minoan civilization requires holding multiple perspectives simultaneously, appreciating their achievements while recognizing their limitations, admiring their cultural productions while questioning their social costs, celebrating their innovations while acknowledging their vulnerabilities. This complexity makes the Minoan story more valuable, not less. It shows us real human societies rather than simplified narratives of either triumph or failure. The archaeological evidence continues to accumulate. New techniques continue to provide fresh insights. Scholarly interpretations continue to evolve. The Minoan story isn't finished. It continues through ongoing research, fresh discoveries, new questions, evolving interpretations. Every excavation season brings new finds. Every analytical technique reveals new information. Every generation of scholars brings new perspectives and questions to the evidence. Future research will likely address questions that current scholars are only beginning to formulate. Advances in genetic analysis may reveal more about population movements and biological relationships. Improved dating techniques may clarify chronological questions that currently generate debate. New excavations may discover texts that finally enable Linear A decipherment, transforming our understanding of Minoan language, society, beliefs. Climate reconstruction using increasingly sophisticated techniques may clarify the environmental context of Minoan development and decline. Chemical analysis of pottery, metals, organic materials may reveal more about production techniques, trade patterns, dietary practices. Digital technologies enabling non-invasive exploration of archaeological sites may discover features invisible to traditional excavation methods. But whatever future research reveals, certain aspects of the Minoan legacy seem secure. They demonstrated that sophisticated civilization could develop in prehistoric Europe. They created artistic traditions of remarkable beauty and technical excellence. They established commercial networks spanning the Mediterranean world. They developed architectural and engineering innovations that influenced construction practices for millennia. Most importantly, they remind us of human creativity, adaptability, resilience in the face of challenges. From scattered Neolithic villages to sophisticated Bronze Age palaces, from local craft traditions to Mediterranean-wide artistic influence, from simple agricultural communities to complex administrative systems managing extensive territories, the Minoan achievement represents a remarkable transformation accomplished over roughly 2 millennia. Though their palaces fell and their script remains undeciphered, though their civilization transformed and their name was forgotten for over 3,000 years until modern archaeology recovered their story, the legacy of the Minoans lives on. In the cultural DNA of European civilization, in the archaeological sites that continue to reveal their achievements, in the artistic traditions they influenced, in the historical lessons their story provides. Subscribe to Flow of History to explore more ancient Mediterranean civilizations, from the Mycenaeans who succeeded the Minoans to the Phoenicians who dominated later maritime trade, from the Hittites who ruled Anatolia to the Sea Peoples who disrupted the Bronze Age world, discovering how these interconnected cultures shaped the foundations of Western civilization and created the complex cultural landscape of the ancient Mediterranean that continues to influence our world today.